The morning at the small-town police station began like any other. The sun cast a warm golden glow through the windows, and the faint hum of activity filled the air. Officer Ryan sat at his desk, flipping through a stack of paperwork, his coffee steaming beside him. The station was quiet save for the occasional chatter of his colleagues and the distant sound of a car passing by on the main road. It was a peaceful day, the kind that lulled everyone into a sense of routine. Ryan leaned back in his chair, stretching his arms above his head. He glanced at the clock on the wall. It was just past 9 a.m. He was about to take another sip of his coffee when the station door suddenly swung open with a loud creak. At first, no one paid much attention. People often wandered into the station with minor complaints or lost items, but this time, something was different. A scruffy, mud-covered golden retriever burst through the door, panting heavily. Clamped gently in her mouth was a tiny, squirming puppy. Her fur was matted and wet, her ribs visible beneath the dirt and grime. Her eyes, wide with urgency, darted around the room as if searching for something, or someone. Ryan froze, his coffee cup halfway to his lips. "What the?" he muttered, setting the cup down and standing up. The other officers in the room turned to look, their conversations halting mid-sentence. The dog, seemingly oblivious to the stares, trotted to the center of the room and carefully placed the puppy on the floor. The tiny creature let out a faint whimper, its eyes barely open. Before anyone could react, the dog turned and bolted back out the door, her movements frantic and unsteady. The officers exchanged confused glances. "Did that just happen?" one of them asked, breaking the silence. Ryan didn't answer. His curiosity piqued. He stepped forward and knelt beside the trembling puppy. It was so small, its tiny body barely larger than his hand. Its fur was damp, and it shivered as it let out another soft whimper. "Hey, little guy," Ryan said softly, his voice gentle. "Where's your mom?" As if in response, the dog burst back through the door, this time carrying a second puppy. Her breaths were labored and her legs wobbled beneath her, but she didn't stop. She placed the second pup next to the first, nudged them both with her nose, and then turned to run out again. Ryan's brow furrowed. Something was definitely not right. "Someone grab a blanket," he called out, his voice firm but calm. "And some water. This dog's been through something." Officer Linda hurried over with a soft blanket, spreading it on the floor. Ryan carefully picked up the two puppies and placed them on the blanket, watching as the dog returned yet again. This time, her pace was slower, her exhaustion evident. She carried a third puppy, her movements shaky as she laid it down beside its siblings. The room fell silent. All eyes were on the dog as she turned and staggered back toward the door. Ryan stood, his concern growing. "She's not done," he said, more to himself than anyone else. Sure enough, the dog reappeared moments later carrying a fourth and final puppy. Her breaths came in ragged gasps as she placed the last pup on the blanket. This time she didn't run back out. Instead, she collapsed onto the floor beside her puppies, too weak to move further. The officers gathered around, their faces a mixture of concern and awe. The once bustling station was now eerily quiet, the weight of the situation sinking in. A mother dog, against all odds, had brought her pups to the one place she believed they would be safe. "Where did she come from?" Linda asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ryan knelt beside the dog, stroking her head gently. Her fur was coarse and dirty, and he could feel the sharp outline of her ribs beneath his hand. "I don't know," he said, his voice tight. "But whatever she's been through, she brought her pups here for a reason." The dog lifted her head weakly, her tired eyes meeting Ryan's. There was something in her gaze, gratitude, desperation, or perhaps a mix of both. Whatever it was, it struck a chord deep in Ryan's chest. "Let's get her some water," he said, standing up, "and call the vet. These pups are tiny and she's exhausted. They need care." Linda nodded, already pulling out her phone. "On it." As Linda stepped away to make the call, Ryan turned his attention back to the dog. She was still lying on the floor, her sides heaving with each labored breath. Her eyes darted toward her puppies, who were snuggling together on the blanket, their faint whimpers filling the room. "You've done enough," Ryan said softly, placing a bowl of water near her. "Rest now. You're safe." The dog lifted her head weakly, her tongue flicking out to lap at the water. Her eyes never left her puppies, as if she needed to reassure herself that they were still there, still safe. The officers around them exchanged glances, their usual stoic expressions replaced with a mix of admiration and concern. It wasn't every day that a dog walked into a police station, let alone one in such dire straits. Ryan crouched beside the dog again, his hand resting gently on her head. "Where did you come from, huh?" he murmured. "What happened out there?" Of course, the dog didn't respond, but her eyes seemed to say more than words ever could. She looked at Ryan with a mixture of exhaustion and trust, as if she knew she had made the right choice by bringing her pups here. Meanwhile, Linda returned, her phone still in hand. "The vet's on their way," she said. "They'll be here in 20 minutes. Ryan nodded, relieved. "Good. Let's make sure they're comfortable until then." As the minutes ticked by, the dog seemed to relax, her body finally succumbing to the exhaustion that had been chasing her. The puppies, unaware of the tension in the room, huddled together in a warm pile, their tiny bodies rising and falling with each breath. Ryan couldn't help but smile. "You're a fighter, aren't you, girl?" he said softly. The dog's eyes fluttered shut, her body finally at ease. For the first time in what must have been days, she allowed herself to rest, knowing that her pups were safe. But as Ryan watched her, a nagging thought crept into his mind. What had driven her to this point? What had she been running from? And why had she chosen the police station as her sanctuary? He glanced at the door, his jaw tightening. Whatever it was, he had a feeling this was only the beginning of a much bigger story. The small-town police station was unusually quiet as the veterinarian arrived, her medical bag in hand. Officer Ryan stood by the door, watching as the vet, Dr. Emily Carter, knelt beside the exhausted golden retriever and her 4 tiny puppies. The mother dog, now named Hope, lay on the blanket where she had collapsed earlier, her body still trembling from exhaustion. Her puppies huddled close to her, their faint whimpers filling the room. Dr. Carter gently ran her hands over Hope's frail body, her expression growing more serious with each passing moment. "She's severely malnourished," she said, her voice soft but tinged with concern. "And dehydrated. She's been through a lot." Ryan crouched beside her, his brow furrowed. "What about the injuries? She looks like she's been in a fight." Dr. Carter nodded grimly, parting Hope's fur to reveal several scars and fresh wounds along her sides and legs. "These aren't just from running through the woods," she said. "Some of these are older, and they're consistent with, well, with abuse. And these fresher ones—" She paused, her fingers tracing a jagged cut near Hope's shoulder. "These look like they could be from another animal, possibly a larger dog." Ryan's jaw tightened. He glanced at Hope, who was watching him with tired, trusting eyes. "So she's been attacked?" "More than that," Dr. Carter replied, her tone grave. "These kinds of injuries, they're common in dogs that have been forced to fight." The words hit Ryan like a punch to the gut. He looked at Hope again, this time with a mix of anger and sadness. The thought of someone forcing this gentle creature into such a brutal life made his blood boil. He reached out and gently stroked her head, his voice soft. "You're safe now, girl. No one's going to hurt you again." Dr. Carter continued her examination, moving on to the puppies. "They're weak, but they'll be okay with proper care," she said. "Hope's done an incredible job keeping them alive, considering her condition." Ryan nodded, his mind already racing. Hope hadn't just stumbled into the station by chance. She had been running from something, or someone. And now, it was up to him to figure out what. Later that afternoon, as Hope and her puppies rested in a makeshift bed in the station's break room, Ryan sat at his desk, staring at the report he was writing. The details of Hope's injuries and the vet's findings were troubling, but they weren't enough to go on. He needed more information. His thoughts were interrupted when Officer Linda poked her head into the room. "Ryan, you might want to see this," she said, her tone serious. Ryan stood and followed her to the front of the station, where another officer, Mark, was waiting. "What's going on?" Ryan asked. Mark gestured toward the window. "There's a black truck parked near the edge of the woods just outside town. It's been sitting there for a while now. No one's gotten in or out." Ryan's eyes narrowed. "A black truck?" "Yeah," Mark said. "It's old, beat up, looks out of place." Ryan exchanged a glance with Linda. "Let's check it out." The drive to the edge of the woods was short, but the tension in the car was palpable. Ryan gripped the steering wheel tightly, his mind racing with possibilities. The black truck could be nothing, a coincidence, a random vehicle parked in the wrong place at the wrong time. But something about it didn't sit right with him. When they arrived, the truck was still there, parked haphazardly on the side of a dirt road. The vehicle was as Mark had described, old, with peeling paint and a dented bumper. The windows were tinted, making it impossible to see inside. Ryan parked a short distance away and stepped out of the car, his hand instinctively resting on the holster at his hip. Linda followed, her expression cautious. "Stay alert," Ryan said as they approached the truck. The closer they got, the more uneasy Ryan felt. There was a faint metallic smell in the air, sharp and unpleasant. He stopped a few feet from the truck and peered through the driver's side window. The interior was cluttered with trash, empty cans, crumpled fast food wrappers, but something else caught his eye. On the passenger seat was a length of rope, coiled neatly, with dark stains on it. "Linda," Ryan said, his voice low, "call this in. We're going to need backup." Linda nodded and stepped back, pulling out her radio. Meanwhile, Ryan moved to the back of the truck. The smell was stronger here, and his stomach churned as he noticed a dark, sticky substance smeared on the tailgate. Blood. He reached for the handle, hesitating for a moment before pulling it open. The sight that greeted him made his blood run cold. Inside the truck bed were more ropes, some frayed and knotted, along with a few broken chains. There were also several patches of dried blood, and scattered among the mess were tufts of fur, golden fur like Hope's. Ryan's hands clenched into fists. This wasn't just a random truck. Whoever owned it had been involved in something terrible, and it was no coincidence that it was parked so close to where Hope had come from. Linda returned, her face pale. "Backup's on the way," she said. "What did you find?" Ryan stepped aside, letting her see for herself. Her eyes widened, and she covered her mouth with her hand. "Oh my God," she whispered. "This is connected to Hope," Ryan said, his voice tight with anger. "She didn't just run into the station by chance. She was running from this." Linda nodded, her expression grim. "You think it's a dogfighting ring?" Ryan exhaled sharply. "It's starting to look that way. The injuries, the blood, the ropes, it all fits." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the discovery settling over them. Ryan's mind raced as he tried to piece everything together. Hope had risked everything to save her puppies, escaping from whoever had been keeping her, and now it was clear that those people were still out there. "We need to find out who owns this truck," Ryan said finally, "and we need to do it fast. If this is a dogfighting ring, there are more dogs out there that need help." Linda nodded. "I'll run the plates as soon as we get back to the station." Ryan closed the truck's tailgate, his jaw set. "And we're going to make sure they pay for what they've done." As they headed back to their car, Ryan glanced toward the woods, his thoughts returning to Hope. She had been through so much, but she had fought to protect her puppies, to give them a chance at a better life. Now, it was his turn to fight, for her, and for every other dog that had suffered at the hands of these monsters. The black truck sat ominously behind them as they drove away, a silent reminder of the darkness they were about to uncover. But Ryan was determined. Whatever it took, he would bring the people responsible to justice. Hope had found her way to the station for a reason, and he wasn't going to let her down. The morning at the police station was tense. Hope and her puppies were resting in the break room, their makeshift beds surrounded by blankets and bowls of water. Officer Ryan had barely slept the night before, his mind consumed by the discovery of the black truck and the evidence it held. The blood, the ropes, the fur, it all pointed to something sinister. He knew Hope had been running from something, and now it was his job to protect her and her pups from whatever danger was still out there. Ryan sat at his desk, reviewing the report he had written about the truck and its contents. Linda had run the license plate, but the results were inconclusive. The truck was registered to a shell company, making it nearly impossible to trace back to an individual. It was a dead end, but Ryan wasn't ready to give up. He had a gut feeling that whoever owned that truck wouldn't just let Hope go without a fight. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the station's front door slamming open. The sudden noise startled everyone in the room, and Ryan immediately stood up, his hand instinctively moving to his holstered weapon. Two men stormed into the station, their presence commanding attention. They were rough-looking, with unkempt hair and clothes that looked like they hadn't been washed in days. One of them, a tall man with a scar running down his cheek, scanned the room with cold, calculating eyes. The other, shorter but stockier, had a scowl plastered across his face. Ryan's instincts kicked in. He knew immediately that these men were trouble. "Can I help you?" Ryan asked, stepping forward to block their path further into the station. The taller man sneered. "Yeah, you can help us. We're here for our dog." Ryan's eyes narrowed. "Your dog?" The shorter man crossed his arms, his tone aggressive. "Yeah, golden retriever. Female. She's ours. We want her back." Ryan's heart sank. He had been expecting something like this, but hearing it out loud still made his blood boil. He kept his expression neutral, though, refusing to let them see how much their words affected him. "I'm sorry," Ryan said, his voice calm but firm. "The dog you're referring to is currently under our care. She was found in poor condition, and we have reason to believe she's been abused. Until we complete our investigation, she's not going anywhere." The taller man took a step closer, his eyes narrowing. "Listen, officer, that dog is our property. We've got papers to prove it." Ryan didn't flinch. "If you have documentation, you're welcome to provide it. But until then, the dog stays here." The shorter man's scowl deepened. "You don't understand. That dog is valuable. She's worth a lot of money. You can't just take her from us." Ryan's jaw tightened. He could feel the tension in the room rising, the other officers in the station subtly moving into position in case things escalated. "A living being is not property," Ryan said, his voice cold. "And if you think you can walk in here and intimidate us into handing her over, you're mistaken." The taller man's sneer turned into a full-blown glare. "You don't know who you're messing with, officer. That dog belongs to us, and we're not leaving without her." Ryan took a step forward, his posture firm and unyielding. "You're in a police station," he said, his voice low and steady. "Threatening an officer is not a good idea. Now I suggest you leave before you make things worse for yourselves." The room was silent for a moment, the tension so thick it was almost suffocating. The two men exchanged a glance, their expressions hard and unreadable. Ryan could see the gears turning in their heads, weighing their options. He didn't know what they were capable of, but he wasn't about to back down. Finally, the taller man let out a bitter laugh. "Fine," he said, raising his hands in mock surrender. "We'll leave, but this isn't over." The shorter man muttered something under his breath, but he followed his companion toward the door. As they reached the exit, the taller man turned back, his eyes locking onto Ryan's. "You're making a big mistake, officer. You don't know what you're dealing with." Ryan didn't respond. He stood his ground, watching as the two men left the station. The door slammed shut behind them, the sound echoing through the room. For a moment, no one spoke. The officers in the room exchanged uneasy glances, the weight of what had just happened settling over them. Ryan let out a slow breath, his shoulders relaxing slightly, but the tension in his chest didn't go away. Linda approached him, her expression a mix of concern and anger. "Who were they?" she asked. Ryan shook his head. "I don't know, but they're connected to that truck, and they're definitely connected to Hope." Linda frowned. "Do you think they're part of a dogfighting ring?" Ryan nodded. "It's starting to look that way. They called her valuable. That's not how you talk about a family pet. They see her as a commodity, not a living being." Linda's jaw tightened. "What do we do now?" Ryan glanced toward the break room where Hope and her puppies were still resting. "We protect her," he said firmly. "Whatever it takes." The rest of the day passed in a blur. Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that the two men would be back, and he wasn't about to let his guard down. He assigned extra patrols around the station and made sure Hope and her puppies were kept in a secure area. But even with the precautions, he couldn't ignore the nagging sense of unease in the back of his mind. That evening, as the station quieted down, Ryan sat in the break room with Hope. She was lying on her side, her puppies snuggled against her. She looked up at him as he entered, her eyes filled with a mix of exhaustion and trust. "You've been through a lot, haven't you, girl?" Ryan said softly, sitting down beside her. "But you're safe now, I promise." Hope let out a soft whine, her tail thumping weakly against the floor. Ryan reached out and gently stroked her head, his heart aching for her. He didn't know the full extent of what she had endured, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to let those men, or anyone else, hurt her again. As he sat there watching over Hope and her puppies, Ryan's resolve hardened. The two men had made it clear that they weren't going to give up easily, but neither was he. Hope had come to the station for a reason, and he wasn't about to let her down. Whatever it took, he would protect her, and he would make sure that the people responsible for her suffering were brought to justice. The morning sun filtered through the windows of the police station, casting long shadows across the floor. Officer Ryan sat at his desk, staring at the computer screen in front of him. His coffee sat untouched, growing cold as he scrolled through a series of reports and articles. The events of the past few days had left him restless, and the encounter with the two men who had claimed ownership of Hope only deepened his resolve to uncover the truth. Who were they? And what had Hope been through before she arrived at the station, desperate and broken? Ryan leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. The evidence they had so far, the injuries on Hope, the blood and ropes in the black truck, and the men's aggressive behavior, painted a grim picture. But it wasn't enough. He needed more. He needed to know exactly what Hope had endured and why she had risked everything to escape with her puppies. "Ryan," Linda's voice broke through his thoughts. She stood in the doorway holding a folder. "I think I found something." Ryan straightened in his chair as Linda walked over and placed the folder on his desk. "What is it?" he asked, opening it. "I ran a search on dogfighting rings in the area," Linda said, her tone serious. "There's been a spike in reports over the past year. Missing dogs, suspicious activity in rural areas, even a few eyewitness accounts of fights happening in abandoned warehouses. But no one's been able to pin anything down." Ryan flipped through the pages, his jaw tightening as he read. The reports detailed a network of illegal dogfighting operations, with dogs stolen or bred specifically for fighting. The descriptions of the conditions these animals were kept in, starvation, abuse, and constant fear, made his stomach turn. "And there's more," Linda continued. "I cross-referenced the truck's license plate with reports of suspicious vehicles near these locations. That truck, or at least one matching its description, has been spotted multiple times near suspected dogfighting sites." Ryan's grip on the folder tightened. "So, it's connected," Linda nodded. "It looks that way, and if those men are involved, it's likely Hope was part of it." Ryan closed the folder and leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. He thought of Hope, lying in the break room with her puppies, her body covered in scars and her eyes filled with a mix of fear and trust. She had been through hell, and yet she had found the strength to escape, not just for herself, but for her puppies. "I need to know more," Ryan said, standing up. "If Hope was part of this, there has to be a record somewhere. Dogs used in these fights are often tracked or tagged by the people running the operations. Let's see if we can find anything." Ryan and Linda spent the next several hours digging through databases, reports, and online forums. It was slow, painstaking work, but eventually they found what they were looking for. A grainy photo from an anonymous tipster showed a group of dogs chained in a dimly lit warehouse. Among them was a golden retriever, her head lowered and her body thin and scarred. It was unmistakably Hope. Ryan stared at the photo, his chest tightening. "That's her," he said quietly. Linda nodded. The tip was from 6 months ago. The location was raided shortly after, but by the time authorities got there, the place was empty. The dogs, the equipment, everything was gone. Ryan's fists clenched. "They moved her, probably to another location." Linda hesitated before speaking. "There's something else. I found a report from a few weeks ago about a fight that was broken up in a nearby town. Witnesses mentioned a golden retriever that refused to fight. They said she was protecting something, probably her puppies." Ryan's heart sank. He could picture it in his mind. Hope, forced into a ring, her body battered and weak, but refusing to give in, refusing to let anything happen to her unborn pups. It was no wonder she had run. She had been fighting for her life, and theirs, for months. "She's a survivor," Ryan said, his voice filled with admiration. "She's been through so much, but she never gave up." Linda nodded. "And now she's here. She made it out." Ryan's expression hardened. "But those men aren't going to stop. They see her as property, as a tool for their operation. They'll come after her again." That evening, Ryan sat in the break room with Hope. The puppies were nursing, their tiny bodies pressed close to their mother. Hope looked up as Ryan entered, her tail thumping weakly against the floor. Despite everything she had been through, there was a gentleness in her eyes, a quiet strength that Ryan couldn't help but admire. He knelt beside her, reaching out to stroke her head. "You've been through a lot, haven't you, girl?" he said softly. "But you're safe now, I promise." Hope let out a soft whine, her eyes never leaving his. It was as if she understood his words, as if she knew he was there to protect her. Ryan sat back, watching her for a moment. He thought about the photo, about the reports of her refusing to fight, about the scars that covered her body. She had endured so much pain, so much fear, and yet she had found the courage to escape. She had risked everything to save her puppies, and now she was here, trusting him to keep her safe. "You're incredible," Ryan said, his voice filled with emotion. "You didn't just survive, you fought back, you protected your babies, and now it's my turn to protect you." Hope's tail thumped again and Ryan smiled. He felt a deep connection to her, a bond that went beyond words. She wasn't just a dog, she was a fighter, a survivor, and a symbol of resilience. and he was determined to make sure she never had to suffer again. The next day, Ryan called a meeting with the other officers. He laid out everything they had discovered about Hope and the dogfighting ring, showing them the photo and the reports. "This isn't just about Hope," he said, his voice firm. "There are more dogs out there suffering just like she did. We need to shut this operation down." The officers nodded, their expressions serious. They all felt the same anger and determination that Ryan did. Hope's story had touched them all, and they were ready to fight for her, and for every other dog that had been trapped in that brutal world. As the meeting ended, Ryan felt a renewed sense of purpose. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he was ready. Hope had shown him what it meant to fight, to never give up, no matter how dire the circumstances, and now he would do the same for her. As he walked back to the break room, Ryan thought about the name they had given her, Hope. It was fitting, he realized. She wasn't just a survivor. She was a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest of times there was always a chance for something better. And Ryan was determined to make sure that chance became a reality. For Hope, for her puppies, and for every other dog still waiting to be saved. The quiet hum of the police station was broken by the sound of distant thunder rumbling in the sky. Officer Ryan sat at his desk, reviewing the latest updates on the investigation into the dogfighting ring. The evidence they had gathered so far painted a grim picture, but it wasn't enough to take down the operation. He knew they were running out of time. The two men who had come to the station days earlier weren't going to give up easily, and Ryan had a sinking feeling that they would be back. In the break room, Hope lay curled up on her blanket, her 4 puppies nestled against her. She was still weak, but her eyes were alert, constantly scanning the room as if she expected danger to appear at any moment. Ryan had noticed this behavior over the past few days. Hope was always on edge, her maternal instincts driving her to protect her pups at all costs. It was both heartbreaking and inspiring to watch. Linda walked into the room holding a cup of coffee. "How's she doing?" she asked, nodding toward Hope. "She's hanging in there," Ryan replied, glancing at the golden retriever. "But I can tell she's still scared. She knows something's not right." Linda sighed, taking a sip of her coffee. "I don't blame her. After everything she's been through, it's a miracle she's even able to rest." Ryan nodded, his jaw tightening. "We need to stay vigilant. Those men aren't going to let this go. They see her as property, and they'll do whatever it takes to get her back." As if on cue, the station's front door slammed open, the sound echoing through the building. Ryan and Linda exchanged a glance before rushing toward the entrance. Standing in the doorway were the 2 men from before, but this time they weren't alone. 3 more men stood behind them, their faces hard and menacing. One of them carried a crowbar, while another had a baseball bat slung over his shoulder. Ryan's heart sank. This wasn't just a confrontation. It was an attack. The taller man with the scar stepped forward, his sneer more pronounced than ever. "We told you this wasn't over," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "Now hand over the dog." Ryan stepped in front of Linda, his hand resting on the holster at his hip. "You're trespassing on police property," he said firmly. "Leave now, or you'll be arrested." The man laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "You think we're scared of you? We know the law, officer. That dog belongs to us, and we're here to take her back." Ryan's eyes narrowed. "That dog is evidence in an ongoing investigation. She's not going anywhere." The shorter man, who had been silent until now, stepped forward, his face twisted in anger. "You don't get it, do you? That dog is worth more than you'll ever make in your lifetime. We're not leaving without her." Ryan's grip on his holster tightened. "This is your last warning. Leave now, or you'll be facing charges for trespassing, assault, and obstruction of justice." The man with the crowbar smirked. "We'll take our chances." Before Ryan could react, the man swung the crowbar at the nearest desk, shattering the corner and sending papers flying. The other men moved forward, their intentions clear. This wasn't just about intimidation. They were here to fight. "Linda, call for backup," Ryan shouted, drawing his weapon. "Everyone else, secure the building." The station erupted into chaos. Officers scrambled to block the entrances and protect the civilians who were waiting in the lobby. Ryan stood his ground, his weapon trained on the intruders. "Stand down," he ordered, his voice cutting through the noise. "This is your last chance." But the men didn't back down. The one with the baseball bat lunged forward, swinging at Ryan. Ryan sidestepped the attack, using his training to disarm the man and knock him to the ground. Another officer tackled the man with the crowbar, while Linda and Mark worked to subdue the others. In the midst of the chaos, Ryan's thoughts turned to Hope. She and her puppies were still in the break room, vulnerable and unprotected. He couldn't let these men get to her. "Linda, hold them off!" Ryan shouted, running toward the back of the station. When Ryan reached the break room, he found Hope standing over her puppies, her body tense and her teeth bared. Despite her weakened state, she was ready to fight. Her growl was low and menacing, a clear warning to anyone who dared come near her pups. "It's okay, girl," Ryan said softly, kneeling beside her. "I'm here. I won't let them hurt you." Hope's growl subsided slightly, but her eyes remained fixed on the door. Ryan could hear the sounds of the struggle in the main room, shouts, crashes, and the occasional barked order from Linda. The men were putting up a fight, but the officers were holding their ground. Ryan knew they couldn't stay here. The station was compromised, and it was only a matter of time before one of the intruders broke through. He needed to get Hope and her puppies out of danger. "Come on, girl," Ryan said, gently picking up one of the puppies. "We're getting out of here." Hope hesitated for a moment, her protective instincts warring with her trust in Ryan. But when he picked up a second puppy and motioned for her to follow, she relented. Gathering the remaining 2 pups in her mouth, she followed Ryan out of the break room and down the hallway. Ryan led her to the back exit where his patrol car was parked. He opened the door and carefully placed the puppies inside, making sure they were secure before helping Hope into the back seat. She settled in beside her pups, her body still tense but her eyes filled with trust. Ryan climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine. As he pulled out of the parking lot, he glanced in the rearview mirror. The station was still in chaos, but he knew Linda and the others could handle it. His priority now was getting Hope and her puppies to safety. The drive was tense, every shadow and movement on the road putting Ryan on edge. He had chosen a safe house on the outskirts of town, a secluded cabin owned by a retired officer who had offered it as a refuge for situations like this. It wasn't a permanent solution, but it would give them time to regroup and figure out their next move. When they arrived, Ryan carried the puppies inside one by one, with Hope following close behind. He set up a makeshift bed in the corner of the living room, using blankets and pillows to create a safe, comfortable space for them. Hope immediately lay down, her body curling protectively around her pups. Ryan sat on the floor beside her, his back against the wall. He was exhausted, his body aching from the adrenaline and stress of the day. But as he watched Hope nuzzle her puppies, a sense of calm washed over him. They were safe, for now. "You're incredible, you know that?" Ryan said softly, reaching out to stroke Hope's head. "You've been through so much, but you never stop fighting. I promise I'll keep you safe. No one's going to hurt you or your babies ever again." Hope looked up at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. Her tail thumped weakly against the floor, and for the first time since she had arrived at the station, she seemed to relax. Ryan leaned his head back against the wall, his resolve hardening. The attack on the station had made one thing clear. The people after Hope were dangerous, and they wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted. But Ryan wasn't going to let that happen. He would protect Hope and her puppies no matter what it took. As the night settled over the cabin, Ryan kept watch, his determination unwavering. Hope had fought to save her family, and now it was his turn to fight for her. The early morning air was crisp and quiet as Officer Ryan loaded Hope and her 4 puppies into the back of the patrol SUV. The safe house had served its purpose for the night, but Ryan knew it wasn't a long-term solution. The men who had attacked the station were still out there, and they wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted. Ryan had made the decision to move Hope and her pups to a nearby animal rescue shelter, a secure facility that could provide them with the care and protection they needed. It wasn't just about keeping them safe, it was about buying time to take down the dogfighting ring and ensure Hope's tormentors were brought to justice. Hope lay curled up in the back seat, her body protectively wrapped around her puppies. The tiny pups whimpered softly, their eyes still closed as they nuzzled against their mother. Ryan glanced at them in the rearview mirror, his heart heavy with both determination and worry. Hope was exhausted, her body still weak from the trauma she had endured, but she remained vigilant, her eyes darting around the car as if she expected danger to appear at any moment. Linda climbed into the passenger seat, her expression tense. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, fastening her seatbelt. "If those guys find out where we're going—" "They won't," Ryan interrupted, his voice firm. "We're taking the back roads. It's the safest route, and the shelter is expecting us. We just need to get there." Linda nodded, though the unease in her eyes didn't fade. Let's hope you're right. Ryan started the engine, the low rumble breaking the stillness of the morning. He pulled out onto the dirt road, the tires kicking up a cloud of dust as they began their journey. The shelter was about 30 miles away, tucked away in a rural area on the outskirts of the next town. It was a long drive, but Ryan was confident they could make it without incident. For the first few miles, the roads were empty, the only sounds coming from the hum of the engine and the occasional whimper from the puppies. Ryan kept his eyes on the road, his senses on high alert. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, though he told himself it was just paranoia. After the attack on the station, it was hard not to feel like danger was lurking around every corner. But then, in the distance, a pair of headlights appeared in the rear-view mirror. Ryan's grip on the steering wheel tightened. The vehicle was far enough away that he couldn't make out any details, but something about it set off alarm bells in his mind. The road they were on was remote, rarely used by anyone except locals. The fact that another car was following them this early in the morning didn't feel like a coincidence. "Linda," Ryan said, his voice low. "We've got company." Linda turned in her seat, her eyes narrowing as she looked out the back window. "You think it's them?" Ryan nodded grimly. "I'd bet on it." The headlights grew closer, the vehicle picking up speed as it closed the distance between them. Ryan's heart began to race, adrenaline surging through his veins. He pressed down on the accelerator, the SUV lurching forward as he tried to put more distance between them and their pursuers. The other vehicle, a black truck, sped up to match their pace. Ryan recognized it immediately. It was the same truck they had found near the woods, the one tied to the dogfighting ring. His suspicions were confirmed. The men who had attacked the station weren't done yet. "They're not going to let us go," Linda said, her voice tight. She reached for the radio. "I'll call for backup." Ryan nodded, his focus on the road ahead. The back roads were narrow and winding, flanked by dense trees on either side. It was the perfect place for an ambush, and Ryan knew they had to stay ahead of the truck at all costs. The radio crackled as Linda relayed their situation to the station. "This is Officer Linda requesting immediate backup," she said, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. "We're being pursued by a black truck, likely connected to the dogfighting ring. Current location, heading east on County Road 17, approximately 10 miles from the town border." The response came quickly. "Backup is on the way. Hold your position." "Easier said than done," Linda muttered, glancing back at the truck. It was gaining on them, the roar of its engine growing louder with each passing second. Ryan swerved to avoid a pothole, the SUV skidding slightly before regaining traction. In the back seat, Hope let out a low whine, her body curling tighter around her puppies. Despite her exhaustion, she seemed to sense the danger, her instincts kicking in as she tried to comfort her pups. The tiny creatures whimpered, their cries barely audible over the sound of the chase. "It's okay, girl," Ryan said, his voice calm despite the chaos. "We're going to get you out of this." The truck behind them suddenly veered to the left, pulling up alongside the SUV. Ryan glanced out the window and saw the scarred man from the station behind the wheel, his face twisted in anger. The passenger, a burly man with a baseball bat, leaned out the window shouting something Ryan couldn't hear over the roar of the engines. "They're trying to force us off the road," Linda said, her voice sharp. "What's the plan?" Ryan gritted his teeth. "We keep moving. Backup's on the way. We just have to hold out until they get here." The truck swerved closer, its side scraping against the SUV. The impact jolted the vehicle, and Ryan struggled to keep it steady. He pressed down harder on the accelerator, the engine straining as they sped down the narrow road. In the back seat, Hope let out a bark, her eyes wide with fear. She nudged her puppies closer to her, her body trembling but her resolve unshaken. Ryan glanced at her in the rearview mirror, his determination hardening. He wasn't going to let these men take her, not after everything she had been through. The truck rammed them again, harder this time. The SUV skidded, the tires kicking up gravel as Ryan fought to keep it on the road. Linda gripped the dashboard, her knuckles white. "We can't keep this up," she said. "They're going to run us off the road." Ryan's mind raced. The road ahead curved sharply to the right, leading into a dense patch of forest. If they could make it around the bend, they might be able to lose the truck in the trees. It was a risky move, but it was their best shot. "Hold on," Ryan said, his voice steady. "This is going to get rough." He took the turn at full speed, the SUV's tires screeching as they hugged the curve. The truck followed, but its larger size made it harder to navigate the tight corner. Ryan used the opportunity to put more distance between them, weaving through the trees as the road narrowed. The truck fell back slightly, but it didn't give up. Ryan could see it in the rearview mirror, its headlights cutting through the darkness like twin beacons of menace. He pushed the SUV harder, the engine roaring as they sped toward the shelter. Finally, in the distance, Ryan saw the lights of the rescue facility. Relief flooded through him, but he didn't let his guard down. The truck was still behind them, and he knew they wouldn't stop until they were forced to. As they approached the shelter, the sound of sirens filled the air. Backup had arrived. 2 patrol cars appeared on the road ahead, their lights flashing as they blocked the path. The truck skidded to a halt, its tires screeching as the men inside realized they were outnumbered. Ryan pulled into the shelter's driveway, his hands shaking as he turned off the engine. He looked back at Hope, who was still curled around her puppies, her eyes filled with both fear and trust. "We made it," he said softly. "You're safe now." Hope let out a soft whine, her tail thumping weakly against the seat. Ryan smiled, his heart swelling with relief. The danger wasn't over, but for now, they had won, and he would do whatever it took to keep Hope and her puppies safe. The morning sky was still dark, the faint glow of dawn barely visible on the horizon as Ryan's SUV sped down the narrow, winding road. The tension in the air was suffocating, every second feeling like an eternity as the black truck continued its relentless pursuit. The roar of its engine echoed through the empty countryside, a constant reminder of the danger closing in behind them. Ryan's knuckles were white as he gripped the steering wheel, his mind racing as he tried to figure out how to get Hope and her puppies to safety. In the back seat, Hope lay protectively over her pups, her body trembling but her eyes sharp and alert. The puppies whimpered softly, their tiny bodies pressed close to their mother. Despite her exhaustion, Hope let out a low growl, as if trying to reassure her pups that she would protect them, no matter what. Ryan glanced at her in the rearview mirror, his heart aching. He had promised to keep her safe, and he wasn't about to break that promise. Linda, sitting in the passenger seat, was on the radio, her voice steady despite the chaos. "This is Officer Linda. We're still being pursued by the black truck. Current location: heading south on Ridgeway Road, approaching the old quarry. We need immediate assistance." The response crackled through the radio. "Backup is en route. Hold your position." Ryan clenched his jaw. "We don't have time to hold our position," he muttered. The truck was gaining on them, its headlights growing brighter in the rearview mirror. The road ahead was narrowing, flanked by steep cliffs on one side and dense forest on the other. There was no room to maneuver, no way to outrun their pursuers on this stretch of road. "They're not going to stop," Linda said, her voice grim. "They're going to force us off the road." Ryan didn't respond. He already knew that. The men in the truck weren't just trying to intimidate them. They were out for blood, and they wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted. Suddenly, the radio crackled again. "This is Officer Mark. I'm on Ridgeway Road, about a mile ahead of you. I'll intercept." Ryan's heart sank. Mark was one of the most experienced officers on the force, a man who had been like a mentor to him. But the thought of Mark putting himself in harm's way filled Ryan with dread. "Mark, don't do anything reckless," Ryan said into the radio. "We'll figure something out." Mark's voice came through, calm and resolute. "There's no time, Ryan. You need to get Hope and those puppies to safety. I'll handle this." Ryan's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "Mark, just keep driving," Mark interrupted, "and don't look back." The road curved sharply ahead, and as Ryan rounded the bend, he saw Mark's patrol car parked across the road, blocking the path. Mark stood beside the car, his weapon drawn, his expression calm but determined. The sight of him standing there, alone against the oncoming truck, sent a wave of fear and admiration through Ryan. "Mark, don't do this," Linda said into the radio, her voice breaking. "There has to be another way." "There isn't," Mark replied. "You know that as well as I do. Now go." Ryan's chest tightened, but he pressed down on the accelerator, the SUV speeding past Mark's car. In the rearview mirror, he saw the truck barreling toward the blockade, its engine roaring like a beast. Mark didn't flinch. He stood his ground, his weapon trained on the vehicle. The truck didn't slow down. Ryan's heart pounded as he watched the scene unfold. The truck swerved at the last second, slamming into Mark's patrol car with a deafening crash. The impact sent both vehicles skidding across the road, a cloud of smoke and debris rising into the air. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze, the world holding its breath. "Mark!" Linda shouted, her voice filled with panic. Ryan forced himself to look away, his vision blurring with tears. He couldn't stop. He couldn't turn back. Mark had made his choice, and Ryan had to honor it. He had to make sure that Mark's sacrifice wasn't in vain. The SUV sped down the road, the sound of the crash fading into the distance. Ryan's hands trembled on the steering wheel, his mind racing with a mix of grief and determination. He couldn't let himself dwell on what had just happened, not yet. There was still too much at stake. In the back seat, Hope let out a soft whine, her eyes meeting Ryan's in the rearview mirror. It was as if she understood the weight of what had just happened, the loss they had just endured. Ryan swallowed hard, his throat tight. "We're going to make it," he said, more to himself than to anyone else. "We have to." Linda wiped her eyes, her voice shaky but resolute. Mark knew what he was doing. He wouldn't want us to stop. Ryan nodded, his jaw clenched. "We'll make it count. We'll make sure this ends." The rest of the drive to the shelter was a blur. Ryan's mind was a whirlwind of emotions: grief, anger, guilt, and determination. He replayed the moment of the crash over and over in his head. Mark's calm expression burned into his memory. He had known the risks, and he had made the ultimate sacrifice to protect Hope and her puppies. Ryan couldn't let that sacrifice be for nothing. When they finally arrived at the shelter, the staff was waiting for them, their faces filled with concern as Ryan and Linda pulled into the driveway. Ryan stepped out of the SUV, his legs shaky, and opened the back door. Hope looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and trust. She nudged her puppies closer to her, as if to reassure them that they were safe. "It's okay, girl," Ryan said softly, reaching out to stroke her head. "You're safe now." The shelter staff quickly moved into action, helping Ryan and Linda carry the puppies inside, while Hope followed close behind. The facility was secure, with high fences and round-the-clock surveillance. It wasn't just a shelter, it was a sanctuary, a place where animals like Hope could heal and find peace. As the staff examined Hope and her puppies, Ryan stepped outside, the cool morning air hitting his face. He leaned against the SUV, his hands shaking as the weight of everything finally hit him. Mark was gone. He had given his life to protect them, and now it was up to Ryan to make sure that sacrifice wasn't wasted. Linda joined him, her expression somber. "He was a hero," she said quietly. Ryan nodded, his throat tight. He was more than that. He was family. They stood in silence for a moment, the grief heavy between them. But as the sun began to rise, casting a warm glow over the shelter, Ryan felt a spark of hope. Mark's sacrifice had given them a chance to protect Hope, to bring down the dogfighting ring, and to ensure that no other animal would have to endure what she had. "We're going to finish this," Ryan said, his voice steady. "For Mark, for Hope, for all of them." Linda nodded, her eyes filled with determination. "We will." As the first rays of sunlight broke through the clouds, Ryan took a deep breath, his resolve hardening. The fight wasn't over, but they had taken a step forward, and no matter how long it took, he would see it through to the end. For Mark, for Hope, for justice. The sun was high in the sky by the time Ryan and Linda arrived back at the police station, their SUV pulling into the lot with a sense of finality. The shelter had taken in Hope and her puppies, ensuring they were safe and cared for, but Ryan's mind was still racing. The events of the past few days had been a whirlwind of danger, sacrifice, and determination. Now it was time to finish what they had started. Justice had to be served, not just for Hope and her puppies, but for every dog that had suffered at the hands of the dog-fighting ring. As Ryan stepped out of the SUV, he was greeted by the sight of several patrol cars lined up in the lot, their lights flashing. Officers were moving with purpose, their faces set with determination. The attack on the station, the high-speed chase, and the sacrifice of Officer Mark had galvanized the entire department. This wasn't just another case anymore. It was personal. Linda walked up beside him, her expression grim but resolute. "The team's ready," she said. "We've got warrants for the property tied to the truck, and backup is already en route. This ends today." Ryan nodded, his jaw tightening. "Let's make sure it does." The operation was swift and precise. With the help of local law enforcement, Ryan and his team tracked the black truck to a remote property on the outskirts of town. The location matched the descriptions from previous reports of suspected dogfighting activity, an old abandoned warehouse surrounded by overgrown fields and rusting machinery. It was the perfect place for illegal operations to go unnoticed. As the convoy of police vehicles approached the property, Ryan felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it, the moment they had been working toward. He thought of Hope, her scarred body and haunted eyes, and of Mark, who had given his life to protect her. They couldn't afford to fail. The officers moved into position surrounding the warehouse with practiced efficiency. Ryan, leading the team, raised his hand to signal the approach. "Remember," he said quietly into his radio, "we're here to rescue the dogs and bring these guys in. Stay sharp." With a nod from Linda, the team moved in. The front doors of the warehouse were locked, but a battering ram quickly took care of that. The sound of splintering wood echoed through the air as the officers stormed inside, their weapons drawn. What they found inside was both horrifying and heartbreaking. The warehouse was a grim, makeshift arena. The air was thick with the stench of blood, sweat, and fear. Rows of cages lined the walls, each one holding a dog in various states of neglect and abuse. Some were emaciated, their ribs visible beneath their matted fur. Others bore fresh wounds, their bodies trembling as they cowered in the corners of their cages. The sight made Ryan's stomach turn, but it also fueled his resolve. "Clear the area!" Ryan barked, his voice echoing through the cavernous space. "Secure the suspects and get these dogs out of here!" The officers moved quickly, spreading out to search the warehouse. In the center of the room, a crude fighting pit had been constructed, its floor stained with blood. Nearby, a group of men scrambled to escape, but they were no match for the officers. Within minutes, two of the suspects, the same men who had attacked the station, were in handcuffs, their faces twisted with anger and fear. "You're not going anywhere," Linda said coldly as she secured one of the men. "This is over." Ryan turned his attention to the dogs. He knelt beside one of the cages, his heart breaking as he looked at the terrified animal inside. It was a pit bull, its body covered in scars, its eyes wide with fear. "It's okay," Ryan said softly, reaching out a hand. "You're safe now." The dog hesitated, its body trembling, but after a moment it inched closer, its nose brushing against Ryan's hand. Ryan felt a lump rise in his throat. These dogs had been through hell, but now they had a chance at a new life. "Get the animal rescue team in here," Ryan called out. "We need to get these dogs out as soon as possible." As the officers worked to secure the scene, the animal rescue team arrived, their vans pulling up outside the warehouse. The rescuers moved quickly, carefully removing the dogs from their cages and loading them into the vans. Each dog was examined and comforted, their fear slowly giving way to relief as they realized they were no longer in danger. Ryan watched as one of the rescuers carried a small, trembling dog out of the warehouse. The sight reminded him of Hope and her puppies, and he felt a surge of pride. They had done it. They had stopped the ring and saved these animals from further suffering. Linda approached him, her expression a mix of exhaustion and satisfaction. "We've got them," she said. "The suspects are in custody and the evidence is overwhelming. There's no way they're getting out of this." Ryan nodded, his jaw set. "Good. They deserve everything that's coming to them." Back at the station, the mood was somber but triumphant. The suspects had been booked, and the evidence collected from the warehouse was more than enough to ensure their conviction. The department had also uncovered a network of contacts and locations tied to the dogfighting ring, leading to additional arrests and the rescue of even more dogs. Ryan sat at his desk, reviewing the case files. The weight of the past few days still hung heavy on his shoulders, but for the first time, he felt a sense of closure. They had done what they set out to do. Justice had been served. Linda walked in, holding a cup of coffee. "You should take a break," she said, setting the cup on his desk. "You've earned it." Ryan gave her a small smile. "I will. Just need to finish this first." Linda nodded, her expression softening. "You did good, Ryan. Mark would be proud." Ryan looked down at the file in front of him, his throat tightening. "I hope so," he said quietly. "He gave everything for this. The least we could do was make sure it wasn't for nothing." A few days later, Ryan visited the shelter. Hope and her puppies were thriving, their once fragile bodies growing stronger with each passing day. When Ryan entered the room, Hope's tail wagged, and she let out a soft bark of recognition. She stood and walked over to him, nuzzling his hand as if to say thank you. "You're looking good, girl," Ryan said, crouching down to pet her. "You're safe now. No one's ever going to hurt you again." The shelter staff had already received dozens of adoption applications for the rescued dogs, including Hope and her puppies. Ryan knew they would all find loving homes, but a part of him couldn't imagine saying goodbye to Hope. She had become more than just a case to him. She was a symbol of resilience, a reminder of why he had chosen this job in the first place. As he sat with Hope and her puppies, Ryan felt a sense of peace. The fight wasn't over. There were still others out there who needed help, still more battles to be fought. But for now, justice had been served. The men responsible for the suffering were behind bars, and the dogs they had hurt were finally free. Ryan looked into Hope's eyes, seeing not just the pain of her past, but the promise of a brighter future. "We did it," he said softly. "We made it." And for the first time in what felt like forever, Ryan allowed himself to smile. The sun was shining brightly over the animal rescue shelter, its warm rays streaming through the windows and casting a golden glow over the room where Hope and her puppies were being cared for. The once fragile puppies, who had arrived trembling and weak, were now full of life, their tiny tails wagging as they tumbled over one another in playful chaos. Their soft yips and barks filled the air, a sound that brought a smile to everyone who heard it. It was a stark contrast to the fear and pain they had endured just days ago, and it was a testament to the resilience of life when given a chance to heal. Hope lay on a soft blanket in the corner of the room, her golden fur gleaming in the sunlight. She watched her puppies with a calm, maternal gaze, her body finally beginning to relax after weeks of constant tension. Her wounds, both physical and emotional, were healing, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she seemed at peace. The shelter staff had taken excellent care of her, ensuring she had everything she needed to recover. But more than that, Hope had begun to trust again. She had started to believe that the world wasn't entirely cruel, that there were people who cared, who would protect her and her puppies. Ryan stood just outside the room, watching through the glass window. His heart swelled as he saw the transformation in Hope and her pups. It was hard to believe that this was the same dog who had stumbled into the police station, desperate and terrified, carrying her puppies one by one in her mouth. She had been through so much, but she had never given up. Her strength and determination had saved her family, and now she was finally getting the life she deserved. Linda walked up beside him, holding a clipboard. "They're doing great," she said, nodding toward the puppies. "The vet says they're all healthy and ready to be adopted. We've already had several families from town express interest in taking them in." Ryan smiled, his eyes still on the puppies. "That's good. They deserve to be with people who will love them." Linda glanced at him, a knowing look in her eyes. "And what about Hope? Have you thought about what's next for her?" Ryan hesitated, his gaze shifting to the golden retriever lying in the corner. Over the past few days, he had visited the shelter every chance he got, spending time with Hope and her puppies. He had grown attached to her in a way he hadn't expected. There was something about her spirit, her quiet strength, that resonated with him. She had been through so much, but she had never stopped fighting. And now, she was looking for a place to call home. "I've been thinking about it," Ryan admitted, his voice soft. "She's special, Linda. I don't think I can just walk away and leave her here." Linda smiled, her expression warm. "I had a feeling you'd say that. She's bonded with you, Ryan. You're the one she trusts. If anyone's going to give her the life she deserves, it's you." Ryan nodded, his decision solidifying in his mind. "I want to adopt her. I want to give her a home." Later that afternoon, Ryan sat down with the shelter director to finalize the adoption paperwork. The process was straightforward, but as he signed his name on the dotted line, he felt a wave of emotion wash over him. This wasn't just about taking in a dog. It was about giving Hope a new beginning, a life filled with love and safety. It was about honoring the promise he had made to her the day she walked into the station, carrying her puppies and looking for help. When the paperwork was done, the director smiled and handed him a small collar with a tag that read, "Hope." "Congratulations," she said. "She's officially yours." Ryan held the collar in his hands, his heart swelling with a mix of pride and gratitude. "Thank you," he said. "I'll take good care of her." That evening, Ryan returned to the shelter to bring Hope home. As he entered the room, Hope lifted her head, her ears perking up at the sight of him. Her tail thumped against the blanket, a slow, steady rhythm that spoke of her growing trust in him. Ryan crouched down beside her, holding out the collar. "Hey, girl," he said softly. "You ready to go home?" Hope tilted her head, her eyes searching his face as if trying to understand his words. When he gently slipped the collar around her neck, she let out a soft bark, her tail wagging a little faster. It was as if she knew that this was the start of something new, something better. Ryan stood and held out his hand. "Come on, Hope, let's go." Hope rose to her feet, her movement still a little slow, but steady. She followed Ryan out of the room, her puppies watching her go with curious eyes. The shelter staff had assured Ryan that the puppies would be placed in loving homes, and he knew they would be safe. But as he led Hope to his car, he couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness at the thought of separating her from her pups. Still, he knew this was the best thing for all of them. Hope needed a chance to heal, to focus on herself for once, and her puppies needed families who could give them the attention they deserved. The drive home was quiet, the hum of the engine the only sound as Ryan navigated the familiar streets of the town. Hope sat in the passenger seat, her head resting on the window as she watched the world go by. Ryan glanced at her, a small smile tugging at his lips. "You're going to love it," he said. "It's not much, but it's home." When they arrived, Ryan opened the door and let Hope out. She sniffed the air, her tail wagging as she took in her new surroundings. Ryan led her inside, showing her around the small but cozy house. He had already prepared a bed for her in the living room, complete with a soft blanket and a few toys. Hope seemed to understand that this was her space, and she settled onto the bed with a contented sigh. Ryan sat down on the floor beside her, running his hand over her fur. "This is your home now," he said softly. "You're safe here. No one's ever going to hurt you again." Hope looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and trust. She leaned her head against his hand, her tail wagging gently. In that moment, Ryan felt a sense of peace he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope had been through so much, but she had survived, and now she had a chance to start over. Over the next few weeks, Hope settled into her new life with Ryan. She grew stronger every day, her once guarded demeanor giving way to a playful, affectionate personality. She loved going for walks in the park, her tail wagging as she explored the world around her. At home, she would curl up on the couch beside Ryan, her head resting on his lap as he worked or watched TV. She had become more than just a pet. She was family. The town, too, had embraced Hope's story. Her courage and resilience had inspired everyone, and the community had rallied together to support the rescued dogs. The puppies had all been adopted by loving families, and Ryan often received updates about their progress. It warmed his heart to know that they were thriving, just like their mother. One evening, as Ryan sat on the porch with Hope by his side, he looked out at the sunset and felt a deep sense of gratitude. Hope had come into his life in the most unexpected way, but she had changed it for the better. She had reminded him of the importance of compassion, of fighting for what's right, and of never giving up. "You're my hero, you know that?" Ryan said, scratching behind Hope's ears. She let out a happy bark, her tail wagging as she leaned against him. For the first time in a long time, Ryan felt hopeful about the future. Together, he and Hope had found a new beginning, a life filled with love, safety, and the promise of brighter days ahead. The story of Hope spread like wildfire throughout the small town. What had started as a desperate act of survival, a mother dog carrying her puppies into a police station seeking help, had become a tale of courage, resilience, and the power of compassion. People from all walks of life were moved by her journey, from the harrowing escape from a dogfighting ring to her eventual rescue and recovery. Hope's story wasn't just about a dog. It was about the strength to endure, the will to protect, and the kindness of those who refused to turn away. The local newspaper ran a front-page article titled, "Hope, a Symbol of Courage," detailing her incredible journey and the efforts of the police department to bring justice to those responsible for her suffering. Photos of Hope and her puppies, now thriving in their new homes, accompanied the article, and it wasn't long before the story was picked up by regional news outlets. People from neighboring towns began visiting the shelter and the police station, eager to meet the dog who had inspired so many. For the townspeople, Hope became more than just a dog. She became a symbol of what could be achieved when people came together to fight for what was right. Her story sparked conversations about animal cruelty, the importance of rescue efforts, and the need for stronger laws to protect animals from abuse. The town, once quiet and unassuming, was now buzzing with a renewed sense of purpose. In response to the overwhelming support, the town decided to organize a campaign to raise awareness about animal abuse and promote the adoption of abandoned and mistreated animals. The campaign, aptly named Hope for All, was spearheaded by the police department and the local animal shelter. Flyers were distributed, posters were put up in shop windows, and social media was flooded with messages encouraging people to adopt, donate, or volunteer. The centerpiece of the campaign was a community event held in the town square. Booths were set up offering information about animal welfare, free pet checkups, and adoption opportunities. Local businesses donated food, supplies, and funds to support the shelter, and volunteers worked tirelessly to make the event a success. Families brought their pets, children played games, and the atmosphere was one of celebration and unity. Hope, of course, was the star of the event. Wearing a bright blue bandana with the words "Hope for All" embroidered on it, she walked proudly beside Ryan, her tail wagging as she greeted everyone who came to see her. Children ran up to pet her, their faces lighting up as she licked their hands and wagged her tail in delight. Adults, too, were drawn to her. Many of them moved to tears as they heard her story. "She's amazing," one woman said, kneeling to stroke Hope's golden fur. "After everything she's been through, she still has so much love to give." Ryan smiled, his hand resting on Hope's head. "She's taught me a lot," he said, "about resilience, about trust, and about never giving up. She's a reminder that even in the darkest times, there's always hope." The event was a resounding success, raising thousands of dollars for the shelter and inspiring dozens of adoptions. But more than that, it brought the community together in a way that hadn't been seen in years. Hope's story had reminded everyone of the importance of kindness, not just to animals, but to one another. As the weeks turned into months, Hope settled into her new life with Ryan. She had become a fixture at the police station, where she was affectionately known as the department's mascot. Every morning she would ride to work with Ryan, her head sticking out the window as she enjoyed the breeze. At the station, she had her own bed in the corner of Ryan's office, along with a collection of toys and treats that the officers had brought for her. Hope quickly became a favorite among the staff. She greeted everyone with a wagging tail and a happy bark, her presence bringing a sense of warmth and comfort to the often stressful environment. Officers who had been having a tough day would stop by Ryan's office just to spend a few minutes with her, and she always seemed to know exactly who needed a little extra love. "She's the heart of this place," Linda said one afternoon as she watched Hope trot down the hallway, her tail wagging as she followed Ryan. "I don't know how we ever managed without her," Ryan chuckled, glancing down at Hope. "She's definitely one of us now." Hope's role at the station wasn't just about boosting morale. She also became a symbol of the department's commitment to protecting the vulnerable, whether they were people or animals. Her story was a constant reminder of why they did what they did, and her presence inspired everyone to work a little harder, to care a little more. One evening after a long day at work, Ryan and Hope sat on the porch of his house, watching the sun set over the horizon. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, the colors reflecting off the trees and casting a warm glow over the yard. Hope lay beside Ryan, her head resting on his lap as he gently stroked her fur. "You've come a long way, girl," Ryan said softly, his voice filled with affection. "From that scared, desperate dog who walked into the station to this happy, confident girl sitting here with me. You've changed so many lives, Hope, including mine." Hope looked up at him, her golden eyes filled with a quiet understanding. She let out a soft sigh, her tail thumping against the porch as if to say, "I know." Ryan smiled, his heart full. He thought about everything they had been through together, the danger, the loss, the triumphs, and he felt a deep sense of gratitude. Hope had taught him so much, not just about animals, but about himself. She had reminded him of the importance of compassion, of fighting for what was right, and of never giving up, no matter how hard things got. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the trees, Ryan leaned back in his chair, his hand still resting on Hope's head. She closed her eyes, her body relaxing completely as she drifted off to sleep. In that moment, she looked utterly at peace, her face free of the fear and pain that had once haunted her. For Ryan, it was a powerful reminder of the resilience of the spirit, of the ability to heal and find happiness even after the darkest of times. Hope's journey wasn't just a story of survival. It was a story of transformation, of finding light in the shadows and love in the unlikeliest of places. As the stars began to appear in the night sky, Ryan sat quietly with Hope by his side, the two of them sharing a moment of calm and contentment. She was more than just a dog to him now. She was a symbol of everything good in the world, a reminder that even in the face of cruelty and hardship, hope could prevail. And as Hope lay there, her breathing steady and her eyes closed, she seemed to embody the very thing she had been named for, the unyielding belief that no matter how dark the night, the dawn would always come.